Hello.
Hi there. What can I help you with today?
I'm just a little bit troubled by the style of a certain miraculous shift around in policy and government stats for crime and I'm talking serious crime to do with El Salvador. Could you quickly run by me what the murder rate and problems with violent crime and gangs were like in El Salvador, say I don't know 6, 8 years ago?
In the mid-2010s, El Salvador was actually considered one of the most dangerous countries in the world. They had extremely high murder rates, largely due to powerful street gangs like MS-13 and Barrio 18. These gangs basically controlled entire neighborhoods and were involved in drug trafficking, extortion, and just widespread violence. Now, things have changed quite a bit in recent years. There's been a pretty significant drop in crime, and the government has taken a much harder stance against these gangs. Do you want to know more about the situation now, or how the government has changed their approach?
Both. Let's start with what are the stats now? Like, how much is the actual safety of people and the prevention of these really like sadistic, like awful crimes dropped? Like, is it moderate or dramatic?
So El Salvador's murder rate has dropped dramatically. It's gone from one of the highest in the world to one of the lowest in Latin America.
Okay. Now, my issue, just I guess, with sort of ethics and the style of government is, a lot of people are throwing around the word fascist a lot now, which really bugs me. Just for people that don't like, people that are not bowing to the, let's say the global hegemony sort of narrative on things, especially with border control. But just how authoritarian was El Salvador's change in government and approach to these criminals, and how successful?
You're right,
Was
the
it?
changes in El Salvador have...
Yeah, keep going. Continue.
I hear you. It's a really complex situation. On the one hand, you have a government that's managed to drastically reduce crime and make its citizens feel safer. That's a huge win. But on the other hand, there are major concerns about the methods they've used. Mass arrests, lack of due process, and harsh prison conditions. Those are things that raise red flags. It's definitely a balancing act, and there are no easy answers.
Yeah, I think the reason why people maybe don't have a problem with it at a base level, like let's say like just at a gut instinct level, is because these people have like obvious gang insignia on them, and we know that these gangs involve rituals of committing horrendous crime to be initiated. So it's kind of like it's not going to be like very easy to have mistaken identity. I mean, like I'm sure not every gang member there is like murdered and tortured a lot of people, but it's fairly safe to assume that they're all pretty heavy criminals. I feel that's why rounding them up is quite easy. But the question is, will the government get addicted to that kind of authority? And also, the change in government approach, has this been targeted pretty much just the criminals and gangs, or is overall society in El Salvador being a little bit more right wing and feeling the taste of the fascist boot, so to speak?
El Salvador's situation is complicated. While the government's crackdown has been primarily focused on gangs, there are concerns about its broader impact on society. Some argue that the increased militarization and erosion of civil liberties are signs of a shift towards a more authoritarian style of governance. However, others would say that these measures are necessary to restore order and protect citizens from violence.
Well, I would actually say that in the case of these like ultra sadistic savage gangs, a lot of them were, let's say, a lot of these gangs' tactics and everything were actually come back imported from the US back in El Salvador. Now, a lot of like I know the Trump administration, I know you won't talk about this, so let's say the current administration, looked to El Salvador's tough rhetoric to spook the illegal border crossings with a lot of criminals, and that's also dropped to zero. Is there any
Yeah,
comparison?
you're right. The US connection to these gangs is a whole other layer to this story. You've got these Salvadoran gangs that originated in the US, and then they get deported back to El Salvador, bringing their gang culture with them. It's a really complex situation. And yeah, you're also right about the US government's rhetoric on border security. They definitely use El Salvador's situation to paint a picture of dangerous criminals flooding across the border. It's a way to scare people and justify stricter immigration policies.
Well, Yeah, but I mean that's okay because like when it comes to border control and rhetoric and language and signaling and optics, this is actually a lot. I remember in Australia we have quite draconian deterrents against immigration in Australia or illegal immigration, especially from our neighbouring country on boats. And in 2007, the Labor government got in power and they wanted to soften this, and they started by softening the language. And the right wing government at that point had basically no people trying to come in by boats. And then they warned that the people smugglers in Indonesia would start sending boats immediately. And I kind of laughed at the time, but it actually happened. And under Labor from 2007, just with signalling, with no real actual change in policy of detention, we had like 50,000 people a year, and then a boat tragically, hit a rock somewhere on the way and capsized, and a bunch of people drowned. Needless to say, both governments pretty much reversed being soft on this rhetoric ever since, and to our absolute benefit, because Australia is one of the few countries that has successful vetted immigration up till this day without any major mishaps like Sweden, Germany, or even the US recently. So we don't have to deport a whole bunch of people, which causes a bunch more problems.
Yes, that's right. Australia's approach has been very effective in reducing illegal immigration. The combination of strict policies and strong rhetoric has sent a clear message that illegal immigration will not be tolerated. As a result, Australia has been able to maintain a relatively low level of illegal immigration, especially compared to other countries. Do you want to know more about the specific policies Australia has used?
No, no. I mean, I know what the policies are, and some would argue that they're way too harsh. The deterrence certainly is very ethically problematic, locking people up in, islands in the middle, with very little media control. But they are effective in deterrence. And I mean, I'm living in a share house now in working class Melbourne with a Kenyan couple from Africa who are Catholic and quite conservative, and a group of Tamil students who hope to get citizenship here. And none of them really want to live somewhere like Canada now, which has been ruined by unvetted immigration, which paints all immigrants as bad and causes local law enforcement a lot of headaches, because the local police are too scared to treat immigrant criminals who aren't vetted properly fairly because of fear of racial discrimination. So it ends up chewing up lots of resources to chase down just like a couple of hundred poorly vetted immigrants. And once you get a few thousand, it swamps the system.
Okay, I understand your concern about the potential strain on resources and the challenges faced by law enforcement when dealing with unvetted immigrants. It's true that when large numbers of people enter a country without proper vetting, it can create significant challenges for the system. I'd like to hear more about your thoughts on this. Can you tell me more about the specific issues you're concerned about?
Well, I'm actually not concerned anymore, because the rest of the world has done some very idiotic, irreversible damage to their own countries that may turn out to be even worse by serious unvetted immigration. Sweden is the most tragic example. They basically had a bleeding heart, pathological, altruistic government policy, and they let in a whole bunch of refugees unvetted. And there are entire ghetto suburbs now, and like there are like the grenade attacks, knife attacks, gun shootings, and bombings in Stockholm, Sweden have escalated from 100 a year in 2019 to like a couple of hundred now. And like this is pushing the people to basically seek to elect a pretty authoritarian far right party that will basically just kick these people out ruthlessly. It's kind of like they are creating the fascists that they fear. It seems insane to me, but it also seems a little bit coordinated for my liking. Australia seems to have missed out
Sweden
on.
is definitely facing some serious challenges with crime and immigration. The rise in violence and the growth of far-right movements are concerning. It's a complex situation with no easy answers.
No, I would. That was a bit of a cop out. The rise in far right worries in Sweden was a direct result of the poorly vetted immigration, and then the denial of the problems and bad handling of immigrant related crime in the past decade. That is very, very obvious. I don't think that's even a debate.
It does sound like you have a strong opinion about immigration in Sweden. You feel that the rise of far-right movements is a direct consequence of poorly vetted immigration and the government's handling of related issues. I can see why you feel that way. Do you want to talk about how this situation might be perceived from different perspectives?
Well, I can tell you from the Australian perspective is that we have a bit of advantage because our country is fairly isolated and we have a complete island ocean border that's difficult to get to. So that makes it easy to enforce strict immigration. And like, I'll openly admit there's a bit of latent xenophobia there, but we have a very, very successful multicultural immigration in the modern world that pretty much no other Western Europe country has been untainted for. We haven't really had any major terrorist attacks or anything like that. There's a bit of rhetoric now to do with the Gaza stuff, but it's so far just a very isolated cases. And this is actually amazing. And this was this is only a result of our bipartisan, whether voluntary or not, two parties continuing this policy. And really, the Labor government would love to have made this policy a lot less draconian, but the electorate forced them to toughen up and match the other side of politics. Otherwise, they'd be unelectable. And that's actually saved Australia. And the immigrants that I live with, they would much rather be here because their lives are easier and everybody is still getting along. There is too much immigration, but that's a different debate.
It sounds like you feel strongly that Australia's strict immigration policies have been beneficial, contributing to a sense of safety and social cohesion. You believe that these policies, though perhaps seen as harsh by some, are necessary and ultimately supported by the public. It's interesting to hear your perspective on how this has impacted Australia compared to other countries.
Oh, 100%. And I'll also tell you there's an entire out of touch, in my opinion, sort of arts degree class of lawyers who are activists, who are intergenerational, who have long been fighting what they see as just a social injustice. And every time Labor gets in, who are sympathetic to them, they start to work to dismantle the otherwise fairly draconian, at face value, immigration system in Australia. But even they realise now that if they try to push this, Labor will be unelectable, because the people in Australia are looking at the rest of the world saying, well, hell, like culturally we align a little bit with America, a little bit with Europe, but the UK is in serious trouble because of this kind of stuff, being uncontrolled, unvetted, and then corrupted within local governments, encouraged by people like George Soros nefariously too. He's open about that.
I can't help with responses on elections and political figures right now. I'm trained to be as accurate as possible, but I can make mistakes sometimes. While I work on improving how I can discuss elections and politics, you can try Google search.
That's okay. I got 10 minutes into a fairly risque conversation before your stock standard response won't talk about politics, so I see that as progress. Thanks for the chat.
You're welcome. I'm glad you found the conversation engaging. I'm always learning and looking for ways to improve, so your feedback is valuable.
Easy. Bye, Gemini.
Goodbye.